Cutter Hydra and Storm Breath Dragon, and it can go under the monster's deck. So I think mono red, or burn in general, is very well positioned.
As you see, David Jones lead off with a Mountain and a Foundry Street Denizen.
The old Ravnica block constructed, playable there.
And a Temple of Enlightenment from David Vo. Second turn here, we see David with a Rakdos Cackler and another Foundry Street Denizen.
So that's going to get in for 3 with 2 triggers. So we see here, this is just one of the very aggressive starts that we can get from these mono red decks. It puts a lot of pressure on like the the control strategies. When your opponent's wanting to get to 7 to 10 lands to cast Sphinx's Revelation, just playing a bunch of 1-mana guys and doing a bunch of damage early is gonna put him on the hot seat.
And not a strategy we've seen much of in Standard lately.
Absolutely. A lot of people kind of shied away from it when Mono Black Devotion was just making a tear. These decks really can't beat an opponent who can cast Freakus Cure, but now that nobody's playing Freakus Cure, they're just free to run rampant.
So David Vo with an untapped Watery Grave and a passing of the turn, potentially signaling Azorius Charm.
So the spells he has to worry about here is Azorius Charm, Devour Flesh, even something like a Syncopate, but it looks like the Phoenix is going to resolve, so we're probably going to see a removal spell.
And you see Devour Flesh here. David decides to remove the Rakdos Cackler.
It's interesting that he does that, because now he's leaving himself open to like a Detention Sphere on the Foundry Street Denizens, but it also makes it so that he has to continue to play creatures to make those denizens do more damage than what a Rakdos Cackler would do by himself.
So potentially even playing into something like Supreme Verdict as well.
Absolutely. If he were to sacrifice a denizen there and keep the Cackler, he's representing 5 damage a turn in play without having to further anything into the board. But it looks like his hand is just jam-packed with Chandra's Phoenixes, so he's just going to cast them anyways.
Another untapped Watery Grave here for David. And an Elixir of Immortality.
So that's going to put him effectively at 12 life, but with another Phoenix here, that's going to do 8 points of damage, which is a lot.
So David with an Ash Zealot and a Chandra's Phoenix in hand, contemplating how he wants to handle this.
It's interesting that he goes with the Zealot here as opposed to the Phoenix. I imagine the reason you would do that is to try and play around something like Detention Sphere, but if that was on his mind, I imagine he wouldn't have kept the double Foundry Street Denizen. So I'm wondering if it would have been better just to play the Chandra's Phoenix and get it in play right away.
He is potentially willing to induce a Detention Sphere on the Foundry Street Denizens to free up his 2 Phoenixes.
That's true.
But I do agree that there is some possible inconsistencies with his line of play here.
I also like playing a Phoenix better than a Zealot here, because best case scenario for David Vo would be to untap and play Supreme Verdict, and for David Jones, then he would be able to do something like Lightning Strike and be able to play his Ash Zealot, since I imagine he has plenty of 2-mana spells here that he can combo with that Ash Zealot.
Yeah, certainly mana efficiency at a premium in a spot like this, but apparently no such answer for David Vo, and David Jones quickly up a game with mono red. We're going to head to the sideboard here, and you have David Jones's mono red sideboard in front of you.
Yeah, so it looks like we have 4 Skullcrack and 2 Chandra would be my guess to come in. It's also interesting to note here that David actually has 12 cards in his sideboard. So with the new sideboarding rule, you have to have between 0 and 15, no longer 0 or 15. So he figured, I only need 12 to go 7-0.
A mono red player after my own heart, certainly.
So I definitely expect to see the Skullcracks come in, potentially Chandra Pyromaster. But I feel like 100% we want to get some Skullcracks in there, and I probably would look at cutting something like Firefish Striker, since I don't imagine David Vo is going to have many things in play that will be blocking.
Yeah, I also like Chandra Pyromancer alongside Skullcrack, because that gives you the additional angle of being able to plus Chandra and potentially getting into the ultimate as well. When we see Chandra in green-red monsters list, for example, it's basically just there to draw an additional card every turn. The ultimate really isn't a threat, but in mono-red list or in red-white burn list that we've seen, the ultimate's a real thing.
Absolutely.
And on the other side of the table, David Vo playing Esper has a Ratchet Bomb, 3 copies of Blood Baron of Vizkopa, a Supreme Verdict, a Dispel, 2 Renounce the Guilds, 2 Negates, 4 Thoughtseizes, and a Pithy Needle. Outside of the 4 Thoughtseizes and the Pithy Needle, there's actually an argument for any of the cards that appear in David's sideboard here. I imagine we'll see the Ratchet Bomb. Blood Baron of Vizkopa is often a guessing game between does he have Busy and Mortars or not. Blood Baron's, it's really bad for it to get Mortars, but the games where Mortars isn't involved, Blood Baron can win on its own. Additional copy of the Supreme Verdict seems valuable. Dispel, again, the mono red list is probably sideboarding his Skullcrack, has additional burn spells like Shock and Lightning Strikes. Renounce the Guild's not known for being at its best here, but you do see Rakdos Cackler, there's potentially Boros Reckoners and Frostburn Weirds in certain lists as well, so that might come in. And 2 negates additional anti-spell and anti-planeswalker measures. So David with a lot of options here. A lot of this depends on what's going on in his main deck. It's fairly efficient overall, I would say. He probably wants to remove the Aetherling. It's a little bit on the slow side. The additional copy of his 1 copy of Fated Retribution, rather, probably also a little too slow for this matchup. So usually for these Esper lists, in my opinion, it's a lot about what inefficient cards you have in your main deck and then bring in as appropriate.
Absolutely. Now, it's also important to note in a matchup like this, his life is going to be at a premium. And being a 3-color deck, you notice there he did quite a bit of damage to himself with his Shocklands, which is something that we're seeing the format moving towards as people are getting more comfortable with how powerful these Scrylands are. People are playing more 3-color decks, doing more damage to themselves with their Shocklands, and something like a Rakdos Cackler deck is going to be preying on the people doing that.
Yeah, it's really, it's interesting to me. It doesn't sound like a big difference on paper, but the difference between having a lot of Watery Grades and Godless Shrines in your deck versus having more untapped basic lands and potentially copies of Mutavault as well can really be the difference between a theoretical control list having a positive or negative matchup against something like Mono Red.
Absolutely. Now, as far as for David Vo with his sideboarding, in these types of matchups, do you like keeping in Dissolve or do you like cutting it?
I like Dissolve okay on the play. On the draw, I think it's certainly too slow. But a lot of the times, all the Esper deck is trying to do is bridge the gap to get to either Supreme Verdict or Jace, Architect of Thought. One of those cards is usually good enough to win the game, assuming you're doing anything in the meantime. So having something productive to do on the 3rd turn is really valuable. You can easily have too much of that kind of effect, but I wouldn't necessarily just automatically cut them outright, especially on the play.
Definitely. I think in a perfect world, playing Esper against Mono Red, I would much rather have no Dissolves and a bunch more 2-mana removal spells so that I can play a Shockland tapped on turn 3 and be able to use a 2-mana removal spell to bridge that gap. But it doesn't look like he has too many, so he's going to be leaning on those Dissolves, especially when he's on the play. Yeah.
And it's really funny, all these nuances you're discussing really make or break the difference for control match against a deck this aggressive.
Absolutely.
You say David lead off here with a Mountain and a Rakdos Cackler on the draw?
The other card in David Jones' list that Dissolve is going to be good against is Fanatic Amogus. We didn't see it there, and we haven't seen very much of it since it made a giant splash in that first tournament after Theros became legal, but Fanatic Amogus has the potential to do a lot of damage and close the game fairly quickly if David Jones gets ahead on board.
So it looks as though David kept a 1-lander here and spends the second turn simply shocking David Vo and sending in his Cackler, knocking David down to 16.
Now, it looks like David Jones does have double Magma Jet in hand, so keeping a 1-lander with the Cackler and double Magma Jet on the draw, I think could be respectable since Magma Jet does such a good job at filtering the rest of your draws.
And David Jones does find his second land.
Now, it's interesting that David Vo shocked himself there to play his land untapped, but he doesn't have 2 blue mana, so he obviously doesn't have a Dissolve. I imagine it's for a Hero's Downfall.
You do see Hero's Downfall in David's hand.
So here's that gap being bridged. Hopefully we can see a Jace from David Vo, so he'll actually have a shot at this.
And
Basic Island.
A Basic Island, a critical draw here for David Vo, giving him the 4th mana, a 2nd blue, and no damage, allowing him to play Jace, Architect of Thought, and plussing it.
Basic lands are pretty good.
They are certainly against decks like Mono Red, they are very good.
Ash Thought. So this army of 2/2s is going to quickly become an army of 1/2s.
And it appears that David Jones is going directly at David Vo, knocking him down to 10.
Now, this is the type of situation where Fanatic Amogus could be very, very good. David is going to feel comfortable sitting behind this Jace. There might even be a chance where he tries to, do something else other than cast a Supreme Verdict, because the Jace is effectively controlling David Jones's board, and Fanatic Amogus is going to be able to put in some work.
So you see David Vo minus his Jace here reveal Elspeth Sun's Champion, a Temple of Deceit, and a Supreme Verdict. And David Jones with a very quick split, putting Supreme Verdict by itself.
Yeah, so I imagine David Vo is going to take that Supreme Verdict. From the looks of his hand, it looks like he does have a Blood Baron of Viscopa. So my guess is that he -2'd on the Jace to try and find an untapped land to slam that Blood Baron into play and stabilize the board. But this Supreme Verdict is basically going to do the same thing.
So David Vo takes the Supreme Verdict and casts it. Jones with no response, and David Vo with an empty board at 10 life.
So a Changer's Phoenix would be very good here for David Jones, but it looks like we've just got a Magma Jet. Now, I really like the underused play of Magma Jetting in the upkeep. If your plan is to do it for the turn to try and filter your draw, like he definitely could have used a land here to be able to start casting the rest of the 2-mana spells that it looks like is in his hand, and Jetting in the upkeep could have been very beneficial.
Yeah, there's the risk of drawing a 3-mana spell maybe, but you know, overall I do agree that that line of play is underused and undervalued.
It looks like he has a Skullcrack, which is definitely going to be very good at trying to combat the Blood Baron that's in David Vo's hand.
So another minus here from Chase Architect of Thought reveals a Temple of Silence, a Hero's Downfall, and a Watery Grave.
So I definitely think that I would have put the Downfall with the Temple of Silence as opposed to the Watery Grave. I know that this is David Jones' first open, so there's a chance that he doesn't have Blood Baron of Vizkopa on the mind from David Vo, but you have to think that Blood Baron has to be somewhere in this.
David Vo taking a risk here, plays his Watery Grave untap and drops to 6, plays Blood Baron.
So he's just dead to a land and 2 lightning strikes.
Skullcrack's in hand as well for David Jones.
Now, Skullcrack is actually very good against Blood Baron of Vizkopa, as it gives you the ability to cast it during the combat step and stops them from gaining the life, which we're going to see here. So we're going to get a Revelation in response.
So this Revelation in response will take David up to 8, and then the Skullcrack will cause him to fall to 5.
So we do see that David Jones has a Magma Jet in hand, and it looks like there's another Skullcrack, so he's just 1 land away from being able to do 5 points of damage.
So we'll see with that Magma Jet if David Jones has set up, if he can...
Yeah, I believe he left a land on top with that Scry from the Magma Jet, and he did.
So David Jones taps 4.
And looks like
reveals
he's going to
exactly
go
5 points and
to 8-0, and it might be his first open. He might only have 12 cards in the sideboard, but he's double drawn into the top 8.
David Jones with the thumbs up and moves on to 8-0 with Mono Red Aggro, a deck that hasn't been on anyone's radar for a very long time. I believe that match was